Hi everyone, my name is Rebecca Rubenstein. Welcome to my presentation of the monograph I chose called Cats, Carpenters, and Accountants, Bibliographical Foundations of Information Science by Wayne de Fremery. If you were drawn to the catchy title of this book, join the club, so was I. I'm an accountant, I love cats, and who doesn't appreciate a good carpenter? But how are these things related, or are they unrelated? The book ends up making a surprisingly big claim that information science and even artificial intelligence actually grows out of much older practices of listing, describing, and organizing information. In this presentation, I'll walk through de Fremery's main arguments, the historical examples he uses, and how the book connects to ideas we've discussed in this course about information history and infrastructure. I'll then give you my reaction to the book and my own personal interpretation of the title, and highlight some quotes from book reviews by professionals in the world of library and information science. I will finish with a list of possible questions for you to answer in our discussion module. Cats, Carpenters, and Accountants is a whimsically titled monograph that explores the idea that lists and descriptions are the essence of bibliography and form the foundation of modern-day information science. The author, a professor at Dominican University in Northern California, connects traditional bibliography to modern data science such as artificial intelligence and machine learning by investigating historical bibliographical practices. His main argument is that bibliography is the foundational infrastructure of information science, which itself is infrastructure for all of society, and that, quote, bibliography could hardly be more integral to our intellectual and creative lives than it is now. The book is structured into two parts. The first introduces, summarizes, and historicizes the idea of bibliography in great detail and provides, yes, a list of over 80 synonyms for the term. Here are just some of the terms on that list, which helps to portray the power of lists as bibliographical tools. He also discusses bibliographical enumeration, which can be defined as the systematic development of lists. The second part focuses on the idea of description, which puts these lists and structures into context. Together, they build a case for a, quote, understanding how bibliography is foundational in infoscience, integral to AI, and a potent critical tool for reflecting on information science and AI. De Fremery uses the term carpentry accounting to describe bibliography as the practical work of building structured systems and counting and listing items. He also cites Belgian visionary Paul Otlet, a pioneer in information science, and Rutgers' own Tefko Sarasevic, the late distinguished professor emeritus of library and information science, to illustrate how infoscience is not just about computers or databases, but about long-standing practices of documenting, categorizing, and keeping records. De Fremery utilizes interdisciplinary frameworks, such as philosophy, math, and even poetry to argue that infoscience has foundations in historical practices of recording, classification, and documentation. Citing philosopher Michel Foucault's The Order of Things, the author highlights that knowledge is ultimately shaped by classification systems that change over time. De Fremery references mathematician Kurt Gödel's method of turning logical math statements into listed numbers called Gödel numbers, as well as Korean poet Yi Sang, his work Diagnosis 01, which depicts a listing of formal numbers showing how artistic forms can reveal bibliographic enumeration. Fun fact, the author lived and taught in Korea for 20 years, and his PhD was about Korean poetry. De Fremery uses a creative device of the Archimedes palimpsest, a medieval manuscript that originally contained math texts by a Greek mathematician and was later erased and used as a Christian prayer book. Centuries later, modern imaging technology was able to reveal the original hidden text using subtle patterns inscribed in the parchment, a process that closely resembles how AI detects statistical patterns in encoded text rather than directly interpreting meaning. The book's themes tie nicely into the framework covered in week 2 of our course, which focused on information history as a field of study. For example, the Mack and Rainier reading, What is Information History? Imagines Socrates and Aspasia debating whether Hesiod's list of cows is part of this history. They both agree that lists have also been used by ancient civilizations, like the Egyptians and Sumerians, some of the earliest known societies. This book also connects to Week 5's exploration of information infrastructures. In one chapter, the author points to Bowker and Starr, authors of the seminal book Sorting Things Out, Classification and Its Consequences, and their argument that classifications are powerful but mostly invisible. We only notice them when they break down or become controversial. I admit I was drawn to this monograph by its unusual title. As I read the book, I challenged myself to decipher the relationship between carpenters, cats, and accountants. By the end, I understood the title as a list of 3 unrelated items representing a metaphor for which bibliography brings organization to unorganized things. I appreciated the author's explanation of why he used those particular items, reflecting on his nostalgia for the smell of sawdust at his father's woodworking business and the quiet of his mother's home office where she would handle the accounting for that business. The cats acknowledge the author's own, quote, marginal position relative to whatever might be considered central to information science, and, quote, the paradoxically foundational work that bibliographers perform at the margins of what has become known as the field of information science. I found the text somewhat challenging to get through as it got very into the weeds and specific details of the various historical examples he used to argue his case, but I persisted, and I particularly appreciated learning about the critical role that bibliographers play in shaping modern knowledge systems. I was able to find 4 book reviews in various scholarly journals as referenced here. The book's reception was generally favorable, yet a few reviewers noted its plodding nature that may challenge some readers. One reviewer offers that the book, quote, can be slow-going for anyone unfamiliar with de Fremery's scholarly discussions, while another states, quote, this is hardly a text for the uninitiated. The reward for following the argument comes only after careful consideration and attention to the erudite and omnivorous expostulation, end quote. A University of Wisconsin professor and librarian writes, quote, the book compellingly makes the case for bibliography as foundation infrastructure of information science. For any librarian or information scientist interested in deep dive of their discipline, a read of de Fremery may be a challenge well worth your time and attention. Another reviewer, a library and information science PhD, appreciated the author's interdisciplinary approach, stating it will, quote, undoubtedly spark important discussions and offers valuable insights for anyone interested in the future of information organization and processing. To conclude, while this book was sometimes dense and slow to get through, I ultimately found its central idea compelling. De Fremery is asking us to rethink information science, not as something that began with computers or databases, but as something rooted in very old human activities, making lists, keeping records, and describing the world in structured ways. The book ultimately reframes bibliography not as an outdated practice, but as a foundational one that shapes the systems that organize knowledge today, including the technologies behind AI. Here are 3 questions I have posted in the discussion section. Please respond to one. I look forward to hearing your thoughts and moderating the discussion.